Okay, let's get into it. We're about to explore one of the most, well, unsettling ideas in all of philosophy. It's a theory that doesn't just ask what you believe, but get this, whether believing itself is even a real thing at all. So, let me ask you a question. Do you believe you have a mind? I mean, it seems like the most obvious question in the world, right? Of course you do. You've got thoughts, feelings, desires, all that stuff. It feels like the most undeniable fact of your entire life.
But what if that feeling, that absolute certainty you have about your own mind, what if it's just wrong? Not just a little bit wrong, but fundamentally mistaken. Well, that is the shocking core claim of a position called eliminative materialism.
So what are we really talking about here? What's actually being challenged? It's literally the entire common sense way we think about ourselves and other people. It's a framework so fundamental we don't even realize it's there.
Well, philosophers call it folk psychology, and really it's just our everyday built-in understanding of the mind. I'm talking about concepts like beliefs, desires, intentions, feelings, the whole shebang. Like when you say, oh, she went to the fridge because she believed there was a soda in there and she wanted one. That's you using folk psychology. It's the mental software we all run without even thinking about it.
All right, so if that's the theory we all use, folk psychology, then what's this idea that wants to throw it out? Well, that brings us right to the main event.
This is eliminative materialism, and its claim is pretty wild. It says our folk psychology isn't just a little bit off or incomplete. No, it's a radically wrong theory, a primitive one. And just like we threw out old, bad scientific theories, this one is headed for the scrap heap, which means the things it talks about, beliefs, desires, intentions, they don't actually exist.
Okay, so to really get this, think about the history of science. Back in the day, scientists thought that things burned because they contained a substance called phlogiston. Now, when modern chemistry came along, it didn't just tweak the phlogiston theory, it completely eliminated it. It showed there's no such thing as phlogiston. It just doesn't exist. Well, eliminativists are betting that the same thing is going to happen to our idea of beliefs and desires once neuroscience really figures out the brain. Now, it's super important to not mix this up with another idea called reductive materialism. See, a reductionist looks at lightning and says, yep, lightning is real, and we can reduce it to an explanation of electrical discharge. But an eliminativist looks at the ancient Greek idea that lightning is Zeus's anger and says, nope, that's not real at all. We need to eliminate that concept entirely and replace it with meteorology. The argument here is that belief is a lot more like Zeus's anger than it is like lightning.
So you're probably thinking, why on earth would anyone actually believe this? It sounds nuts. Well, there are some pretty powerful arguments behind it. Let's take a look at the case for elimination. All right, so philosophers like Paul and Patricia Churchland, who are big names in this field, basically argue that as a scientific theory, our folk psychology is, well, it's terrible. For one, it's stagnant. I mean, it hasn't really changed in thousands of years. Plus, it has huge explanatory gaps. It can't tell us much about really important stuff like sleep or how learning works or mental illness. And maybe most importantly, when neuroscientists actually look inside the brain, they don't find beliefs or desires, they find action potentials and spiking frequencies, a whole different language. The track record for folk theories, whether in physics or biology, is pretty clear. When a real science comes along, the folk theory gets thrown out. Okay, I know what you're thinking. An idea this out there has to have some major problems, right? You bet it does. There are some huge and pretty obvious objections. So let's flip the coin and look at the case against eliminativism.
The first and biggest objection is just common sense. It's our own intuition. I mean, I can look inside my own head right now, and I'm totally aware of my belief that I am talking to you. It feels more real and certain than almost anything else in the world. To say that it doesn't exist, that just seems absurd.
And that gut feeling leads to a really clever philosophical takedown. The argument that the theory is self-refuting. Think about it. For an eliminativist to even make their case, they have to believe their theory is true, and they have to want you to believe it too. But wait a minute. If they have a belief, then beliefs exist, which means their own theory is false? The very act of arguing for it seems to prove it wrong? It's like sawing off the branch you're sitting on.
On top of that, there's a really practical argument from the philosopher Jerry Fodor. He basically says, hold on, how can you call folk psychology a failed theory when it's so incredibly successful? We use it all day, every day, to predict what people are going to do, to understand their motives, to communicate, and it works. It works amazingly well. Calling it a failure seems to completely ignore how indispensable it is for just living.
So, with these seemingly knockout arguments against it, how could eliminativism possibly survive? Especially that self-refutation problem. That seems like a killer, right? Well, this is where things get really interesting. Modern eliminativists have a more subtle strategy. Instead of trying to tear down the whole house at once, they go for the foundation, the one thing that seems absolutely undeniable, our own subjective experience. And to do that, we need a key term here, qualia. It's a fancy word for a simple idea. Qualia are the subjective, qualitative feels of experience. You know, what it's like to see the color red, or feel a sharp pain, or taste a strawberry. It's the raw data of your consciousness. And just like beliefs, the existence of qualia feels completely, totally undeniable.
Enter philosopher Daniel Dennett. He's a leading voice here, and he's an eliminativist specifically about qualia. He argues that yes, we think we have these rich, private, subjective experiences. But he says our idea of what they are is so confused and contradictory, they can't possibly exist in the way we think they do. And he tries to prove it not with brain scans, but with clever thought experiments designed to mess with our intuitions.
Okay, let's try one of his famous examples, acquiring a taste for beer. So, picture this. The first time you tried beer, you probably thought it was gross, right? But now, maybe you love it. So here's the million-dollar question. What exactly changed? Did the raw taste, the qualia of beer stay exactly the same, and you just changed your judgment about it? Or did the way your brain processes that taste actually change so that beer literally tastes different to you now? Dennett's big point is this. If you can't even be sure about that, if you can't tell the difference, then maybe your special, private access to your own inner world isn't so perfect and clear after all.
And this way of thinking leads us to the modern version of this whole idea, which is often called illusionism. And the goal here isn't just to say, nope, consciousness isn't real. The project is much more ambitious. It's to create a scientific theory that explains why it feels so real. Why do we have this powerful sensation of a rich inner world? The illusionist answer is that it's a kind of user interface, an incredibly useful and convincing illusion created by our brain to help us navigate the world.
So, where does all this leave us? Is this just a weird game that philosophers play, or does it actually matter for the rest of us? I think it has absolutely profound implications. Because this isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle. You have to see it for what it is, a bold, almost audacious prediction about the future of science. It's a bet that our most fundamental ideas about who we are, our minds, our beliefs, our feelings, are going to end up in the history books right next to phlogiston and the idea of the sun orbiting the Earth.
What eliminativism really does is it forces us to face a pretty startling possibility. What if the entire language we use to talk about our inner lives, words like love, belief, pain, what if it's just a kind of pre-scientific vocabulary? A placeholder that's destined to be replaced by something far more accurate from neuroscience. And this isn't just about changing some words around. It means our whole idea of what it means to be a person could be completely rewritten. And that really leaves us with the big question to chew on. As neuroscience gets better and better at mapping the brain, what's going to happen to us? Will it just find the brain correlate for belief and give it a new scientific name? Or is it going to discover something so alien, so different from our folk psychology, that we realize our current concepts weren't just incomplete, they were pointing at nothing at all? What parts of you will be explained? And what parts might just be explained away?